Katavija Vekave Dokariya Sijam Jativi Doka Jarabi Doka Baranabi Doka Soka Paridewa Doka Domana Subhaya Sabi Doka Abhiyehi Samyogo Bidokha Biyehi Vivyogo Bidokha Yambeja Nalabadi Dambi Dokha Sangaitena Injubada Nekanda Dokha. Translation we read together. And what bhikkhus is the noble truth of suffering? What is suffering? Aging is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief, and excessive desire are suffering. Association with the dislike is suffering. Separation from the like is suffering. Not to get what one wishes, that also is suffering. In brief, the 5 aggregates of clinging are suffering. So you have to familiar with the Pali, Jati, Jara, Marana, Soka, and also Upadanakanda. Pincha 5, Upadanakanda, aggregates of clinging. So the 5 aggregates of clinging, it is Namarupa, you are observing in this retreat. So in Pali, Kanda and Upadana Kanda. How many Kandas are there? How many aggregates? There are 5 aggregates. Rupa Kanda, Meta aggregates, Vedana Kanda, feeling aggregates, Senya Kanda, perception aggregates, Sankara Kanda, volitional formation aggregates, and Vijnana Kanda, consciousness aggregates. And when they are objects of clinging, they are called aggregates of clinging. Aggregates subject to clinging or aggregates objects of clinging. Upadana Kanda. So there are 5 Upadana Kanda. Now you know the 5 aggregates, 5 Kanda, and the 5 aggregates of clinging. 5 Upadana Kanda, Pinchupadana Kanda. Now you are observing closely that these 5 aggregates of clinging are suffering. So let us see now whether we can find the 5 aggregates by looking at something. As soon as you wake up, you look at something. So when you see something, there is something to be seen, visible object, and there is eye sensitivity through which the object is seen. And then when you see, there is seeing consciousness. There is seeing which arises when the visible object to be seen comes into the avenue of your eye sensitivity. So the seeing consciousness arises. And when you see with that consciousness. So here we see how many aggregates. 1 and 2, the things we see is meta aggregates, rupa aggregates, and consciousness aggregates. When we see something, it can be pleasurable, not pleasurable, sometimes not pleasurable, or sometimes neutral. So we might think it is good to see this object, or it is not good to see it. So feeling is also involved when you see something, and whenever you see an object, your mind or a state of mind makes a mental mark of that object, so it can be recognized when you experience it later. So perception also is involved in the act of seeing. And there are mental states that exert to make some effort to see, to bring the seeing to completion. Though it is very subtle, if you really watch your mind, you will notice that there is a kind of activity or exertion in the mind to see, to hear, and so on. So the sankhara of volitional formation aggregates, that is. So you are looking your 5 aggregates the whole day, the whole month, to develop your vipassana insight knowledge. 5 aggregates can be found in your own experience, not from the books Buddha expounded. According to the instruction of the Buddha, you are finding your in your own experience. In the experience of seeing, you can find all 5 aggregates. 5 aggregates are also present in the experience of hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching. There are many touch sensations in your body, and they can be detected by paying close attention to what is happening at the present moment. Here, a touch includes the feeling of heat, cold, and when you feel cold, that is also a touch. And when you are aware of the rising and falling movements of the abdomen, those movements are touches. And if pressure is felt there, that also is a touch. So in touching something, the 5 aggregates can be experienced in the touch. And then thinking. You can discover 5 groups of grasping at the moment of thinking. mental activities such as thinking, imagining are very extensive in scope. It is frequently occurring when we practice meditation, sitting meditation, they interfere thinking, eating also thinking occur, sometimes walking, thinking interfere, thinking. So don't think too much. So just noting is very favorable. Thinking is not like this. So in waking moments, our mind is almost constantly active. Even in the absence of any attractive present objects in our surroundings, imagination creates them to appear as if in real existence. Sometimes mental hindrances, sensual desire, ill will, restlessness, worry, skeptical doubt are concerned with such mental activities. So the thoughts or reflection on lust, ill will, and cruelty. But during the practice of meditation, these mental hindrances are totally subdued. If these mental activities are mindfully noted as they occur, they are liable to be identified as self or a living entity. So it is very important to note each mental activity as it occurs. So when you carefully analyze, mental activities are also 5 aggregates of grasping, upadana, sometimes very pleasurable thinking, very good dreams, meditation also very smooth, also thinking also pleasurable, thinking may be accompanied by a happy feeling, sometimes unpleasant feeling of thinking. Or sometimes thinking may arise accompanied by neither pleasant nor unpleasant feeling, but a neutral feeling. So when you are not mindful on these 3 types of feeling as they occur, they are liable to grasp at you. You think, I feel pleasant, I feel fine, I feel miserable, I feel bad, I feel neither pleasant nor unpleasant. So for this liability of causing such attachment, these 3 types of feeling are known as Vedana, Upadana Khandha. Then there is also evident sense perception. Sense perception recognizes the object on which the mind is dwelling. The perception is especially pronounced when you try to remember facts to speak. when you try to remember your business and medical appointment, or when you engage in making calculation in checking accounts. So concerning this sanya, wrong view may arise. I remember, I've got memory, etc. So it is called Sinya Upadana Kanda. At the moment of thinking or exercising imagination, there comes into noticeable action. There is phassa, contact. There is vitaka, mental inclination towards the object. And manasikara, fixing your attention on the object. And chetana, which incites and urges you, let it be this way, let it be that way. Chetana, volition is urging you. So the role of chetana is especially pronounced when an important matter happens to come up in your mind, and at the middle of the night, and it cannot be attended to. So the driving urge of chetana is urging you, go now, tell him right now. So the kinds of chetana is very prominent. Sometimes immoral thoughts accompany, sometimes lobha, attachment, dosa, anger, upset, depression. Very fortunately, during the retreat, moral thoughts are lobha, no attachment. Adosa, metta, loving kindness, compassion, etc. And saddha, faith in the practice, faith in the true Buddha, faith in the true Dharma and Sangha. So moral thoughts are very prominent during the practice of meditation in this retreat. So the mental concomitant, phassa, contact, chetana, volition, and manasikara are inciting agents responsible for arising of thoughts, ideas, imagination, concepts, one after another in succession. They are also at the back of every act of our speaking and body movement, such as going, standing, sitting, sleeping, bending, stretching, etc. So the incitement, the urge concerned with each mental, vocal, or physical activities is sankhara, which condition and act by prompting, directing, etc. So the conditioning role of sankhara may result in its being identified as a person or a living entity, and wrongly hold to as I do, I go, I sit, etc. So the view, I think, I speak, I go, I do, is wrong attachment to this conditioning sankhara. So such attachment is known as clinging to karaka atta, attachment to performing self. So this sankara, namely phasa, contact, chetana, volition, manasikara, etc., are called sankhara upadana khandha. Then at the moment of thinking, there is also evident consciousness of the act of thinking. People regard consciousness and mental concomitant, citta and cetasika, together with mind, citta. So the consciousness of the act of thinking is very commonly viewed as soul, ego, for which reason consciousness is also known as vijnana upadana khandha. So at the moment of thinking, the material body which provides the base of thinking is also evident. It's evident that the uninformed people believe it is the material body which is thinking. They think like this. This body is thinking. So for this reason, the material body which provides the base for thinking is known as Rupa Upadana Khandha. So the objects of thought may be Rupa, material, Nama, mental, or name, idea, notion, concept. So these also serve as objects of attachment. So the material object belongs to Rupa Upadana Khandha, and the mental object is classified under the four categories of Nama Upadana Khandha. So now you are discovering the 5 aggregates of clinging because you are observing the thinking very closely. So what you discover when you know thinking? So at the moment of thinking, the material body, which forms the basis of thinking, it is Rupa Upadana Khandha. Sometimes you depressed, you discouraged, sometimes you happy thinking, and unhappy thinking. The pleasant feeling of thinking or the unpleasant feeling of thinking, you discover. It comes and go, and you capture thoroughly, and you note thoroughly and closely, they disappear. So that is Vedana Upadana Khandha. And then you do Metta Bhavana. And you're not mindful. And you think, I am doing Metta Bhavana. I am radiating loving kindness. I am reciting. I am paying homage to the Buddha. But if you're mindful, you can capture these sankhara. You capture that you are radiating Metta Bhavana. You capture the sankhara khanda of reciting Metta chanting, reciting the Tisarana and 8 precepts. So you capture that sankhara khanda when you do Metta recitation, when you do chanting, when you take Tisarana and 5 precepts. So mental urging and mental inclination to accomplish the acts of thinking, speaking, or doing, that is sankhara upadana khanda. And just being conscious of thinking, that is vijnana upadana khanda. So when you think during the practice of sitting, walking, or eating, you discover the 5 aggregates at the moment of thinking. So Mahasi Sierra aphorism, we have to recite. So look at your paper. Number 6. So can you follow me? At the moment of thinking, the material body, which forms the basic of thinking, is Rupa Upadana Khanda. The pleasant or unpleasant feeling of thinking is Vedana Upadana Khanda. Recognizing or remembering the objects of thought is Sinya Upadana Khanda. Mental urging or inclination to accomplish the act of thinking, speaking or doing is Sankhara Upadana Khanda. Just being conscious of thinking is Vijnana Upadana Khanda. So if you're not mindful, you cannot discover these 5 aggregates at the moment of thinking. So it is very important to realize the true nature of thoughts by being mindful of it every time thinking occurs. If you fail to take note of that thinking, and if you fail to recognize its real nature, it will lead to attachment to thinking as I am thinking. There is good dreams of mine. Thinking is permanent. So pleasant thinking, good thinking, bad thinking, etc. There will come attachment. The majority of people in these days are almost constantly clinging to this mental object. So such attachment give rise to active processes for becoming in accordance with the law of dependent origination. And in every stage of new becoming, there will come aging, sickness and death, followed by suffering of sorrow, lamentation, pain, grief and despair. So at the moment of thinking, we need to capture these 5 aggregates. If not, there will come suffering. So luckily you are always mindful of the thinking. So your mindfulness is developed on each occurrence of a thought. You see that the thinking disappears very immediately. As soon as you capture the thinking, it's gone. It's gone. It's totally gone. You understand the true nature of impermanence of the thinking. So many thinking you note and they disappear very fast and you don't like it. There is suffering. You understand that they are uncontrollable and insubstantiality. Nature, dukkha, anatta will become evident when you mindful of that thinking. So if you know the true nature of the thinking, and they are nature, dukkha, anatta, no attachment to the thinking. So no active process for new becoming take place. And when there is no new becoming, the mass of suffering represented by aging, sickness and death, sorrow, lamentation, etc. is completely eliminated. So this cessation of suffering as a result of mindfulness on each thought as it occurs is momentary. So be satisfied with your momentary cessation. You come to practice meditation. Every meditation retreat you come, and many years you practice, momentary cessation. So continue practice. But if the practice of noting every thought is continued, you gain temporary cessation of each noting. Finally, sure, at the time of Ariya Mega becomes fully developed, the mass of suffering we have been completely eradicated. So Samocheda, the mega process is very short, but you need to practice meditation 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. Don't give up. Continue your practice. Finally, the total eradication will come. So while being occupied with the exercise of noting, rising, falling, sitting, touching, thinking intervenes, thinking interferes. So that thinking, rising, falling, thinking, rising, falling, thinking, and then go back to rising, falling, and finally thinking can be eradicated. So don't forget, note it, thinking, and finally thinking will be disappear finally. So this detailed analysis you have made we demonstrate clearly that what becomes prominent at the 6 moments of seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, and touching and thinking are merely Vinchupadanakanda, 5 groups of grasping. So unmindful people cannot practice this exercise of noting at the moment of seeing. They think the subject which see is obviously some substantial body. I have this substantial body, and the external object which is seen is also obviously woman, man, a substantial body. He also have substantial body. She also have substantial body. However, in reality, there is no such substance. There is no mass to form a physical body. Now, when you see, you note seeing, eye sensitivity and the visible object, and seeing consciousness, you capture it for that momentary and then disappear. You can see no substantial body. Sound very clear. Hearing, and you capture the sound wave and the hearing consciousness. The more you note, the more they disappear, and then you can see no substance or no mass to form that physical body. So in reality, there is no such substance, no such mass to form the physical body. There are only the 5 groups of grasping. Nothing exists except at the 6 moments of seeing, hearing, etc. So they become evident only at the 6 moments, and what become evident are also just the 5 groups of grasping. So you see no person, no individual, no living entity, no man, no woman. You just see and you just capture the 5 groups of grasping occurring at the 6 moments, occurring at the 6 moments. So that is vipassana. Vipassana means observing every phenomena, observing every 5 groups of grasping occurring at the 6 and those occurring at the 6 moments. So at the moment of seeing, you note it. At the moment of hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and knowing, you note it, you observe it, you capture, sometimes feeling, pleasant or unpleasant, sometimes intention, sankhara, and sometimes rupa, and sometimes perception, etc. So many types of groups of grasping you can discover. So now what you will discover is 5 groups of grasping at the 6 moments. 5 groups of grasping, or there is only Namarupa at the 6 moments. Can you follow me? There are the 5 groups of grasping at the 6 moments. There are the 5 groups of grasping at the 6 moments. There is no person, only 6 moments are there. Seeing moment, hearing moments, smelling, tasting, touching, and knowing moments. 5 khandhas due to your mindfulness and wisdom. You can capture sometimes sensations, sometimes perception, sometimes sankhara, etc. So there is only the 5 groups of grasping at these 6 moments. Meditator can discover this. So dreadful suffering of new becoming, aging, death, sorrow, grief, etc. arise because of the 5 groups of grasping. So long as these 5 groups of grasping exist, dreadful suffering of becoming, aging, death will continue. So the 5 groups of grasping are themselves dreadful suffering. In short, because there is physical body, rupa, physical and mental suffering dependent upon rupa arise. Because there is the knowing mind, physical and mental suffering arise. So rupa and nama, or the 5 groups of grasping, are dukkha, dreadful suffering. So in other words, in our life, we have only 3 feelings, sometimes very unlucky, unpleasant feeling, sometimes luckily, pleasant feeling, sometimes neutral. The whole life is sometimes pleasant, sometimes unpleasant, sometimes neutral. So the unbearable physical and mental distress are dreadful intrinsic suffering. They are dukkha, dukkha. So we all fear these suffering. We don't like, we hate it. So this dukkha vedana, feeling of pain, or upadana khanda, is the real truth of suffering. How about the pleasant sensation in our body and mind? They are agreeable, they are delightful, enjoyable. Why they lust? But when these agreeable, delightful, enjoyable sensation, feeling vanish, they are replaced by discomfort, dissatisfaction. It is suffering. So these kinds of suffering, known as viparinama dukkha, comes about through change from a pleasant state or condition to something different. It is terrible. So pleasant sensation, pleasant feeling, changing. We need to be aware. So to the areas, noble ones, pleasant feeling are like the ogress who bewitched people with her beauty and turn them met. So for Ariyas, Buddhas and Arahants, and also other Ariyas, pleasant sensations are dreadful, upadanakanda, or the same. They are truth or suffering. At the same time, pleasant feelings are transitory, and to maintain this pleasant sensation, it requires constant conditioning effort to maintain that status. So this also troublesome. So to the wise, it is real dukkha. The remaining upekkha vedana, the neutral feeling, and the upadanakanda or sinya, sankara, vijnana, and rupa are always in a state of flux. They are transitory. So to the noble ones, these upekkha vedana, etc. are also dreadful. So as death awaits constantly, having to rely on the impermanent upadanakanda for physical substance is dreadful, like living in a building which shows signs of collapsing at any moment. We can die anytime. We can collapse anytime. So the transitory nature of the upadanakanda requires constant effort at conditioning for the maintenance of the status. So this sankhara dukkha, the troublesome task of conditioning, is also dreadful. So to the noble person, noble ones, not only the pleasant or unpleasant feeling, but the remaining upadanakanda are also dreadful truth of suffering. So as all the five aggregates of grasping are regarded by noble ones as really terrible suffering, the Buddha has said in conclusion of the definition, the truth of suffering, Sanketena Pinjupadanekanda Dukkha. In short, the five groups of grasping are dreadful suffering. The five groups of grasping, or the rupa and nama, which could cause attachment as I, mine, permanent, blissful, self, ego, are just dreadful suffering. So this is the end of the first noble truth. Birth is suffering, decay is suffering, death is suffering. So all 11 suffering plus the final one is Sanketena Pinjupadanekanda Dukkha. The five groups of grasping are suffering, or the mind and matter are suffering, or the seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, touching, and knowing are suffering. Or the five groups of grasping at the 6 moments are suffering. So we continue next time the second noble truth of the origin of suffering. It is craving which gives rise to fresh rebirth, power with lust and greed, now here and now there, ever finds fresh delight. So 3 kinds of craving: sensual craving, craving for existence, and craving for self-annihilation. So we have to stop our discourse for today by practicing vipassana meditation by observing every phenomena occurring at the six senses. May you all understand the first noble truth of suffering. May you eradicate the origin of suffering, that is craving. May you realize the cessation of suffering, that is nirvana. May you develop the path leading to the cessation of suffering. May you all liberated from all suffering. May you realize the real peace in the very near future.